Hi everyone, it's Alex, and in an effort to still dwindle down the books I plan to talk about for what I read in April and May, I thought I would dedicate a video to talking about the books I read for the Pulitzer Prize this year. We have the winner, The Overstory by Richard Powers, and we have the two finalists, There by Tommy Orange and The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. And what's always fascinating to me about the Pulitzer is at times just reading the finalists, which I think are so interesting. With finalists that I've loved, like The Idiot by Elif and The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, I really like sort of guessing not only with the Pulitzer how it sort of is in contrast to its contemporaries or the winner with its finalist year by year, but also thinking about how the Pulitzer as a prize being this symbol for readership and people getting into reading, how the winners throughout the years sort of mirror the public and what the world currently stands for or what it might stand for in years to come. For example, thinking of winners from 2009 and 2010, we had all of Kitteridge and also Tinkers, which I read these past couple of months. And I think with those two works back then, I think it did a good job at describing isolation as a symptom of a very troublesome family structure. Thinking of years 2014 and 2015, we had The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt and All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, and I think what those two were doing was describing things in a larger scale, but mainly with this sort of existential inquiry towards life and identity. So while those were just the winners for those years and how I think they sort of consecutively sort of talk to each other, like I said, for this video, I want to talk about the winner, the Overstory, and then the two finalists, and sort of determine what is it trying to do for this year? What are these books trying to say or feel like they're trying to be a symbol for in history? And really quickly, I just wanted to mention two channels that also talk about the Pulitzer extensively, or at least really enthusiastically, and that would be Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading and Greg at Supposedly Fun. I would definitely check them out. They're both channels I really love, and especially if you're more interested in the Pulitzer. So the first book I wanted to discuss was one I actually read last year, and that was There by Tommy Orange, which talks about sort of these linked stories about these Native Americans heading to a powwow, and then eventually all these storylines sort of connect towards the end. I read this more like as a demonstration of Tommy Orange's future writing career. I have high hopes for him, but overall with all these characters and how readers find that they're connecting to each other, I think it certainly shows a display of endurance and how it comes through with character development here that Indigenous people, they have been through a lot historically, but even still now personally, and how we have to be careful not to speak entirely for them. So given the emphasis on these injustices, I do think Tommy Orange does a good job at sort of talking about how maybe even unconsciously our heritage is always at the forefront of our decisions and our life, but in particular I found the ending it sort of accidentally swallows all of the character development or any type of memory associated with these characters, and then overall I just didn't really find the characters significant enough to really find that they were doing anything very unique or extraordinary. Initially, I think my perception of the ending would have been that the sense of the characters being swallowed was intentional in order to mimic how these people are historically remembered already in real life, but I think asking the reader to sort of work up to that sort of conclusion is asking for too much in this case. I think deductions like that, while perfectly fine to interpret, I think should be implemented in the novel if that's how I'm determining how effective I think it is. Next, talking about The Great Believers by Rebecca Makkai. This is a story of a man named Yale and his friends amidst the beginning of the AIDS crisis in Chicago. In a sense, reading this, being so particular to the AIDS crisis in history, it is truly horrifying reading how these characters are so unaware of how sexually miseducated they are, but largely in part because of the narrative being constructed at the same time about how the AIDS crisis would be remembered, especially in particular to how gay men are perceived after this crisis as well. While all of this is happening throughout the story, we actually get a split narrative. I think it takes place more in the future around 2015, and it's from the narrative of this woman who is friends with all these people that were passing or dying due to AIDS. And I think it sort of feels like it does too much. I think what accidentally happens is that with our character here, who's Fiona, she's used as this source of reflection. I'm assuming to be the reader, since we can most closely relate to her and her experience with sort of understanding how the crisis is remembered now in the present. So while her grief itself is evolving throughout all of these years, she's also definitely got her own baggage with like her family stuff and her current life. So that was a bit distracting to be given this sort of additional storyline that does connect in the end, but I didn't feel like too strongly enough. And overall, really, reading this book made me realize how much I appreciate good writing versus being told a good story. And I particularly didn't find myself very attached to any of these characters at all. I at times found them flat and at times petty towards each other, and I'm all for unlikable characters if I feel like they're just not being unlikable to like be sent into the void. The writing, I think, is so forgettable because I think Makkai accidentally gets too involved in how well researched her book is, and making sure that she like gets everything correct to where she sort of misses the mark on the writing, and making sure that there's a reason worth still reading about these characters in the first place. And finally, we have the winner of the Pulitzer this year, and that is The Overstory by Richard Powers, which I will mention it's probably my favorite book that I've read so far this year. The Overstory is a book about many characters that in the beginning part, probably the first 100 pages or a bit after, we're given these vignettes of their lives and really their very first memories with confronting nature and trees in particular. Although the weight of sort of this origin story with the importance of nature, it doesn't entirely feel that groundbreaking because we have some characters that just dedicate their whole lives to maybe researching nature or trees, and then we have one character that just describes their encounter with nature by just falling out of a tree. What you guys have probably heard about this book is that it's definitely that hippie book, the Let's Save the Trees book, which is entirely true. Some characters have that storyline in here, but again, with the characters we're first introduced to with these sort of short stories, because that's what they read like, and they're written very well, and all of these characters have such interesting lives, and I was so surprised that I found them so balanced with each other. It's really amazing to me that Powers is able to emphasize this idea of connection without feeling like the writer. He feels much more like a messenger of communication and how nature sort of brings us all together. And most importantly, I think he brings up the question of why do we protect things that we care about? Why do we have the innate quality or ability to care about things in the first place? And is it just about trees and nature, or does it extend further to people, and which one comes first anyway? I feel like I can't really do it justice to talk about how graceful the writing is, mainly because whenever we do get these first points of intrigue or origin about how these characters confront nature for the first time, it's often with these sort of very horrific moments where these characters get the rug swept from underneath them, but it's never like for the sake of shock. It's just so understated without feeling like it's trying to do something to you as a reader. It feels really genuine, and I think with reading books and reading fiction in particular, I'm so used to the narrative structure of if something bad happens, and here most often in the beginning of the Overstory, I'm assuming there's sort of this journey of recovery for all these characters, but in some instances there isn't. And so speaking of connection again, which I think Richard Powers does such a good job at emphasizing here, it made me really realize that just because you know or you have the epiphany that the world is connected and we're all just here for some sort of larger purpose, possibly, connection isn't passive. Like when you realize it, you have to do something. Whether that be some characters in here fighting for trees or other characters fighting for people they love, and certain instances where they all revolve around nature. It's just the book, The Overstory, reminded me why I read in the first place, and it's to find myself just sucked into a story that's one, executed well, with connection and like storylines, but also written very well. And I really don't want it to make it seem like I'm talking about connection in a way where it's like one character's in a coffee shop on a Saturday and then another character comes in on a Sunday and they were supposed to meet. It's not really like that. It's much more about how we're at the mercy of the world, and there are brief instances in life where we realize it and we sort of ponder on it, but these characters are just pondering on that all the time. So the Pulitzer Prize in general, on their site, they describe how they award the prize as it being a work of fiction that is about American life. And if we're thinking about this year's round of books with the Overstory and then our finalist, I would say that for this year it's about very much the social justice implications of literature and the weight and strength and power that literature can make us think about social justice. So I'm really interested to see how in 2020 what our finalists and what our winner will be like with those similar themes. And in regard to American life, maybe I just really liked the Overstory so much because it reminded me so much of growing up here in Appalachia, but I really encourage you to read it. I encourage you to read all of these books, the finalists included. I would love to know what you think of them as well. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.